There's such a power in representation, and I don't
Ah.
think we talk about it enough. Like, when you see someone that looks like you begin to see yourself in it. And when I was looking around, there was nobody, there was no
Mm.
safe spaces to ask questions. But also, I would always be asked funny questions on the boat as the only Black person on the boat. So
Sure.
either the wetsuits don't fit, or why is your hair like that, what are you going to do with your hair, or everybody starts speaking in Afrikaans, and I'm like, I don't understand. And you're kind of saying, okay, I need to make space not just for me, but for all the little Zandis that are going to come after me. To live with both courage and fear helps you to do a lot of things. It is to
Sure.
see your fear, witness it, and yet choose to be.
Hello, Wisdom and Wellness family. Welcome to another episode. Today, I'm really excited about our conversation as we are with an incredible woman. She calls herself, or they, her friends, and everybody else calls her the Black Mermaid. She was the first Black female freediving instructor with a mission to make the ocean inclusive. Let's welcome Zandi Ndhlovu.
Thank you
Welcome.
so much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, it's one thing to dive, but then you do free diving. Firstly, before we get into a lot of things, what's the difference and why did you go for the one that sounds extreme?
Interestingly enough, so if you think of diving scuba, you've got a tank on your back, you're breathing the whole time. Free diving, that tank is your lungs. And so you learn to hold your breath for long periods of time and you dive with it. And it's funny because when I found this world, when I started scuba diving, it was great, it was amazing, but it wasn't that moment when I'd held my breath for the first time. And so I had to go back to that mission, and it just happened to be the more extreme one. But I
Gee.
absolutely love it, and it is my world.
So what's the longest you can hold your breath for?
Just over 5 minutes. I'm at like 5 minute 10 seconds.
I couldn't believe I don't even think I can do a minute. You can hold your breath over 5 minutes.
Yes.
Comfortably, no
It
panicking. That's just who you are. You're calm, you're connected.
that is not true. Everything you work for, every second you work for. So it's
Sure.
continuous training, like training your body, your lungs to be able to handle high levels of carbon dioxide. And
Sure.
it's probably more preparing your brain more than anything else for the discomfort, because your entire life, your brain handles your breathing, and all of a
Yeah,
sudden you like hand over the keys. Hand
sure.
over the keys. You're not breathing when you think, which is, it's great. I love it.
So basically your whole life is discomfort. The way I saw, and I kind of like it because my phrase for the longest time and even now is always do the hard things. I really believe that in doing the hard things you are liberated in so many ways, and I think it's the best way to live because then you're not walking through life trying to avoid discomfort, trying to avoid pain and difficulty. You live a very open and free life.
That is right on the mark. And there's
Yeah.
something about that moment when, in all the moments that are uncomfortable and that are hard, you learn how to stand in it, and you
Yeah.
welcome it, and you make space for it, because discomfort teaches us a lot about ourselves, and
A
just
lot.
everything you said.
Sure. With that being said, what's a quote or a proverb or a verse that guides your life and your decision making and just who you are?
I think for me, this has definitely come as a lesson from the water, the learning to be present. All I
Mm,
have is now.
all I
And
have is
when
now.
you're freediving, we have this tendency, you learn to forget how the dive started so that you can be present. If you
Mm,
keep on ruminating over whatever you did wrong in the at the beginning of your dive, you don't get to the depth that you want to go. And so it's a funny thing. You let go of the beginning of your dive, but you also let go of the end of your dive. So let's say
sure.
you're diving to 30, 35 meters on one breath. You don't think about where you're going. It's only the here and now.
The
And
present
even
moment.
once you get to the bottom, you are encouraged to never look up, because when you look up, it's the biggest body of water you've ever seen in your life. And you have to dive, you have to like swim back all the way to the top. And the more your brain sees how far it is, the more your brain begins to panic.
Sure.
So it is to focus on the now. The now is all you have. It creates all the futures you could ever imagined, but it allows you to tell the past stories with so much more intention. When you're present to the gift.
When you're present to the gift. There's so many things that I'm just picking up and just the way you're sharing. I can see how you pick up so much wisdom just from nature. And I want you to connect the two. In when you're in the water, when you're diving, what dangers have you experienced from looking back? And I want you to connect that to
Ooh,
life.
ooh. I think for me, the biggest danger has always been in my head. So,
Mm.
like, I dive with sharks, I'm deep in the water. There's so many things that can happen. You just see this random shadow coming in the dark, and you're like, what is that? And it's a shark. And you're like, hey, buddy, what's up?
Oh, hey,
But,
buddy.
but I think there's something about your mind. For
Mm.
me, the danger's always been in the mind. When you take things from the world, or you take situations, circumstances, anything that's happening in your world, and you take it down to the bottom of the sea, both can't coexist. You can't
Wow.
both be present and be wherever else you want to be. And so that for me was the biggest teaching. Uh, it's the biggest teaching of a lifetime, that just the space of yeah, you have to be present. You have to be
Have
with
to
your
be
breath. You
present.
have to train your mind to be where you want it to be. And the danger is always when you are not present to what you're doing. That's the danger. And even with sharks, like, we're taught this fight or flight response. And so when you see this huge shadow, your brain is like, oh my heaven, what is that? You have to rein your brain in. And then whatever comes forward, there's a pause. You
Mm.
don't have to act immediately. If you feel like the shark is in a position that is in slight danger, you swim to it. You don't panic. You don't invite crazy things. You discipline
Sure.
your mind to pause and then move.
What a beautiful, you've said such a mouthful. One, you can't be there and here. Something will happen. And I think it's such a beautiful metaphor for life, that you can't keep living in your past and then also be moving forward in your life. And also you can't be looking too far ahead, because then there's no contentment in your life. And like you said, even with the shock, what in your training, I'm like my mind is just buzzing. Even with the shock when it's coming, you're taught to
Yeah,
pause, to not be a reactive
yeah,
person, but to actually pause in the moment and figure out where to from here. But you're from Soweto, and you share a story about the first time you saw the beach was at 12 years old with your sister. And I love how you narrated the story, that when the water hits your ankles, it's like, oh yeah, this is fun. But as soon as it comes up to your knees, it's like, here comes the danger. All our parents are panicking. So I could relate to so much of that. But for you, it was different. So tell me about the significance of you being exposed to the ocean at the age of 12. And I know at that point, you probably didn't think, wow, this is a moment. But looking back,
Mm. Looking back, I think it was interesting because we grow up with these narratives around water, right? Stay away from the sea. The snake will take you. There's that lives. There's all of these stories that you grow up with. But to witness the ocean's power, that's the one thing I'll never forget. It's kind of like it's a beautiful play when it's at your ankle, but when it's at your knees, you're between the panic of your parents, your internal panic, but then there's the question of what lives beyond the space.
sure.
Like, you're just in awe, there's joy, there's laughter, but there's also fear. And so
Mm,
there's something about that. And I think even as I've grown up to now live with the ocean, I still think about those moments of how big she is, how powerful she is, and for all the lessons and learnings we may have, she's still the boss.
yeah,
She's
yeah,
always the boss.
yeah, yeah,
and and I think that for me is something that I bring into my everyday life, because to live with both courage and fear helps you to do a lot of things. It is to
sure.
see your fear, witness it, and yet choose to
Hmm.
continue along your journey. And so that's the mixture of those two worlds from a young age, but the courage to still move, to not let that fear make you small, you
Yeah.
know?
Tell me, in your upbringing, did you ever, and after that experience, did you ever think, I want to work in the ocean? Did you ever think there's such a career as what you're doing, or did you have something else in mind?
I did not even know that this kind of world could ever exist. Forget like in other communities, even
Yeah.
just for me, I didn't know that it's a world that you could live and work in. And so it was a beautiful surprise when, I went on my first ever snorkel trip. I'm 28 years old. I'm freaking out. And then when I come back from it, I'm in love. I'm like, so what do people do after this? I'm calling up friends. So what do y'all do after snorkeling? Everyone's like, scuba. And then I started scuba diving, and then leading my way, finding my place in freediving, and just knowing
Yeah.
that I was going to leave everything. I left the world I knew to chase her, and it changed everything for me.
Sure. What career were you in before?
We worked in diversity and inclusion work. So we worked in the
Okay.
power industry,
Okay.
helping everybody have the hard discussions around race and identity and how everybody shows up in the workspace. Beautiful, fulfilling space that I think I still do today.
Yeah, everything has merged so beautifully. And I mean, I think you went snorkeling in Bali, right? Was it Bali? Yeah. So
Yes, it was. Yes.
when I saw that, I was like, okay, I guess everyone has their eat, love, pray moment in Bali, and you had yours at 28 when you snorkeled. But from that journey, it led you to obviously taking the diving lessons, and now an instructor. Tell me about the leaving, and like you said, you already had a career where you had a voice, where you were already impactful. So leaving that journey and deciding, okay, I'm going to be an instructor and I'm going to be a first Black female in my country. What does that look like? What kind of fear are you dealing with? What
Mhm.
kind of opposition are you dealing with? Not just externally, but even mentally.
Mm, I definitely have to say, thank you. That's such a beautiful question. So, though it was twofold, right? There's the internal fear. So, in order to qualify to be a freediving instructor, you have to get down to 32 meters on one breath, but you have to do it in mastery. So, there's no panic. You're just like in this Zen mood. And as much as in the beginning, I was diving deeper than everybody in that group at that time, my mind my
Yeah.
mind. Every time I got to 23 meters, whether I had my computer on, whether I could not get past 23 meters, I would just open my eyes and I'd start panicking,
Mm,
surfacing to the top. And it was interesting because my instructor said to me, don't ask me to react to your fears. I see a different Zandi. So don't hold up your fears to me and expect me to react.
whew.
It changed my thinking so much, right? Like, keep your issues with you.
With
I
you.
see where you are going, but don't
Sure.
let your fears, make boo with me.
Yeah.
And so that was the journey, but simultaneously, there was the space that says we have responsibilities outside of just ourselves when we work, especially where I come from. So you're helping out with family, you're helping out with everybody. And to leave a to leave a well-paying job it's no joke, because
No.
again, it was two things. One, I did not even know how you make an income in this world. I did not
Hmm.
know what it means to land on my feet. I did not know what I'm aspiring for. But what I did know is I'm not going to work in a dive shop. I
Sure.
want to bring change in my community. I want to make the ocean accessible to my community. So
Yeah.
that was the first and only thing I knew, because I
Yeah.
was always the only Black person on the boat. And so we have to change the narrative. Started the foundation in 2020 after I qualified. And I think going back, I didn't realize that I would be South Africa's first. I didn't.
That
And
wasn't
so
like a
when I
thing.
qualified, yes, when I qualified, my boyfriend at the time said, I don't think I don't think there's even anyone in sub-Saharan Africa. And so we went to start checking with the different agencies, and everyone's like, no, we don't have, no, we don't have, no, we don't have. And that was crazy, because you kind of think in 2020, we're still in the world of firsts.
Yeah.
And but it was beautiful to know that my call was to create the access to the ocean space,
Mm,
to change the
mm,
narrative, to change how we see ourselves next to the water. I spent all of my savings in like the first year, because I was just like, I want to see this world. I want to see how it's going to work out.
yeah.
And then I didn't know how the hell I was going to live. And so I went back to the sea. I was like, baby girl, I've given up everything for you.
You
I've
better
given
work.
up everything I know. You better say something.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, that's when the brand partnership started coming along. That's when these different opportunities started coming along. And probably a year and a half, 2 years in, I'd landed on my feet. The foundation was doing great. I was able to take home money. It was good.
And I love that, and I think you've shared a little bit, but I just want you to emphasize what sparked the mission for inclusion in the ocean and also breaking barriers. Because it's one thing for you to be a first; it's one thing for you to follow your calling and say, "Hey, I did this thing; it called and I answered." But it's another thing to say, "Hey, it's actually not just about me. Now you want to include others." What? Why was that important for you, or why is that important for you in your journey?
It was interesting because I think there's such a power in representation, and I don't
Ah,
think we talk about it enough. Like when you see yourselves in spaces, you begin to when you see someone that looks like you begin to see yourself in it. And when I was looking around, there was nobody. There was no
mm,
safe spaces to ask questions, but also I would always be asked funny questions on the boat as the only Black person on the boat. So
sure.
either the wetsuits don't fit, or why is your hair like that? What are you going to do with your hair? Or everybody starts speaking in Afrikaans, and I'm like, I don't understand. And you're kind of saying, okay, I need to make space not just for me, but for all the little Zandis that are going to come after me. There has to be a level of comfort in their existence. I
Yeah,
can't sit and just be like, oh, this is fantastic. I need to push the walls. I
yeah,
need to make
yeah,
space so that when they come past, it's easier.
yeah,
And I think that was my journey because of the hardship of all firsts, as I'm pretty sure you would know. The hardship of those firsts they carry,
yeah,
but in that carry, that heaviness, you have a duty to make sure that the ones that come after you don't carry the same kind of heaviness. And
sure.
so from the joy I felt in the sea, I wanted it to live in my
You want
community.
to share it. I
And
love
just
that.
from the dreams that had come, I wanted that to be accessible too. And so representation, I guess.
Yeah, beautiful. Your free diving obviously requires a lot of discipline and skill, but mostly, and as we've already touched, it requires being present and connected to yourself, and connected to whatever's happening around you. How do you continue to cultivate those skills and those disciplines? Because I don't think it's a one sort of thing where you go to training and you're taught, but there's a lot of, from what you're saying, there's a lot of discipline, mindfulness that's required. So, how do you daily cultivate that?
I journal and I wake up almost every morning to my nose clip. So the training happens almost every morning in bed, and you're trying to see where your body is, and you're working with your breath.
Mm,
So for me, I think as a practice, it's my breath training, but also journaling. I believe we don't speak everything that we feel. Some things you write down and you sit and you be with it before you speak about it.
wow.
And I think that's why journaling is an important practice, but also, you know, asking more questions about
Mm,
everything, being more
mm. Being
intentional about
inquisitive, yeah,
everything. Where does my where does my food come from? Where does this water come from? How can I be better with this? How can I be better with this? How can I? It's the continuous space of the ocean has gifted me so much. What
yeah,
can I do in return? We can
sure,
create access, but in my everyday world, what do I do to protect her better? How do I advocate for her protection in communities where people might never see her face to face?
yeah.
So it's the continuous work of kind of having found the love of your life, and every day you hold up a flower to her to say, I see you, I love you. And so it's just that continuous work.
I get so much good. I'm getting like you. I think your use of words really excites me, and your metaphors and how you pick up so many lessons from life. But I think what I'm recognizing at the heart of it is that you live with so much intention, and and purpose. You know, we always speak this word, living in my purpose, and we think it's this big platform and thing. But what I'm understanding and I'm getting from you is that for you, eating an apple is purposeful. Like, where does this apple come from? How can I give back? And from that, I want to get into the Woolworths Farming for the Future initiative that you happen to be part of. I want to know why. Why did you choose to partner with Woolworths on this initiative, and why is it significant for you personally, for South Africa now, and the South Africa of the future?
Mm. I think there's so many parts. When I think of the ocean, our freshwater bodies all come from the sea, right? But South Africa is
Mm,
also a water scarce country. A lot of people
mm,
don't realize that we're a water scarce country. And so
yeah.
how we save water in our everyday life contributes to the future. But when you look at the fresh produce that we eat, there's a lot of sprays, pesticides that are used that run down into communities, affecting communities. Then it runs down to the sea, affecting the
Mm,
sea. And so for me, it's like a circle of life that
mm,
says, as we consume, all other parts consume around us. And how are we
mm.
being good custodians?
Yeah.
To other communities and other life sources. And so for me, when Woolies came up to me, I said, this sounds fantastic. How could this apple save the world? How could this save the world? It's the intentionality behind it. We ask the
Yeah.
questions, where does this come from? What is it that
Mm.
you're doing to help us think and dream differently for the future? You think about the droughts that we had. So Cape Town, obviously, I think it was in 2017, 2018, where there was no water. And so
Yes,
what are the
yes.
lessons that we're learning along the journey? And how are we better prepared for the future? And so when they said, come with us, come see what we do, come see what our farmers are doing, I was like, bet, bet,
Amen.
because you
Yeah.
want to know. We know that Woolies has an incredible brand. It seems sustainable, but what is it that makes them sustainable?
Yeah. What
Right?
is the
So
sustainable thing? Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. Yes, you're not using plastic, fantastic. Everybody has reusable bags.
What else?
Tell us more. And I wanted
Yeah.
to know more. And I think that curiosity drives everything I do. And so to be able to go on that journey was powerful.
Mm. And I want to understand with this Farming for the Future initiative, how does it affect the everyday person? And I mean, there's a whole thing. I love that you spoke about the bag where we use our Woolies bags. And I think with the space of TikTok and social media, consumerism is really pushed. Like we're consuming a lot. People are always doing grocery hauls, etc. And I want to understand, how does this Farming for the Future initiative impact us on a daily, in a broken down language for the everyday person who just picks up a bag and goes shopping? What is Woolworths trying to achieve with this initiative to the everyday person? Because not all of us are farmers, so it's so easy. And I think that's part of the my mission for this year, is to break down the barrier in language. Because when we think of sustainability, future, we think it's somebody else's responsibility, but it's actually affecting us on a daily basis. And so my really, what I'm asking you to do is to break it down in such a way that the next time I go to Woolworths to go get my weekly groceries, there's thought behind it, there's intention behind it, there's understanding that it's not just about this moment, it's not just about getting the most yellow banana. There's so much more happening behind.
I love that question so much because I'm a big let's not jargon things. So, farming for the future looks at four things, right? So, it looks at water, it looks at soil, it looks at carbon emissions, and it looks at biodiversity.
Mm.
So, let's start at water. So, I'm going to speak to the farm that I went to go visit. They catch every single piece of water that they can you say every single piece of water?
Peace.
I don't
Yeah.
know. But so they catch the water that they use to spray on their fresh produce, right? So
Yeah.
obviously to keep everything hydrated, they spray the water, but they don't let that water go to waste.
Hmm.
Why? Because we're a water scarce country. So
Stars.
they
Yeah.
take that water, they clean it up, and they reuse it back in their plant systems, which to
Sure.
me was incredible because it's so easy to let that water go
Yeah.
because there's more coming out the dams and there's more in all the other
Nobody
ways.
asks where
What
it's
does that
coming
mean
from.
for Africa?
Mm.
Exactly. And when you say, how does that affect me and you? It says that the way in which we farm and the strategies that we're able to bring in to make sure that you use less and less water. Like they have these little tomatoes and they have a drip system, right? They have a
Mm.
drip system. They're not just watering all of the tomatoes, they have a drip system to make sure that they minimize the amount of water that they do use when they do use it. So
Sure.
it's thinking about the future because, again, we're a water scarce country. So that for
Yeah.
me was incredibly encouraging. So they bring in that water, they clean it up, and they use it again. That was one. Two, it was interesting because then we got to this another greenhouse, and it is funny because
Sorry,
in nature,
this is the Rennie farm in Paarl, right?
yes, yes, we were
Yes,
in
yes.
Paul at the Rennie's farm, and it was interesting because was it tomatoes? I think it was tomatoes. So in nature, so biomimicry is this study that says we look at nature in how she self-sustains and we
Mm.
replicate those things in our worlds,
Yeah.
and so that we remain in touch with nature. To see that was beautiful because on an ordinary day you'd have these, I think, bumblebees that come to like pollinate the flowers, so they allow for the flowers to the pollen to go from one flower to the next so that they can procreate our little
Yeah.
tomatoes, right?
Yeah.
And they have this like um this blower and they like kind of blow the air so that it mimics the action that the
Ah.
bees would do
Yeah.
outside in order for us
Yeah.
to be able to get still large amounts of produce. But for
Sure.
me it was kind of looking to see how they utilize space, how they utilize water, how they take lessons from nature to
Mm,
ensure that they're able to bring out the best produce possible. And if you allow for cleaner ways of farming, they've got these manual fly traps, but they are working in partnership with Woolies to get to
mm,
a fully natural way of
way.
capturing these bugs that can eat up the produce. But
Yeah,
it's a fully natural way, and it's selective, and it doesn't take all the bugs because
sure.
there are good bugs,
They are
right? So,
necessary.
like
Yeah.
with the one lettuce, I think it's like special to Woolies. It's like this one type of lettuce, but they bring in ladybirds to eat
Mm,
other bugs.
yeah.
So you make sure that your produce is as clean as possible. So
Wow.
again, it's preserving biodiversity, because if you're
So
using all kinds of pesticides that kills just about everything, but it also
everything.
affects the communities. I really
I
loved the
love
trip.
that.
It
So
was
the word
really
you use is
insightful.
biomimicking. Is the word biomimicking?
It's biomimicry.
Biomimicry. Okay, I learned a new word and I'm excited about it because I think in most of, and recently did a podcast and I was talking about flourishing and I was basically explaining the whole process of the oak tree and how it develops and how it relates to our lives. And so not only in food and farming is there biomimicry, but I'm actually going to use it in my own life that there's so many lessons from nature. But how does holistic living, and we with wisdom and wellness, we have 5 pillars that we base holistic success and holistic living, spirituality, relationships, etc. But how does holistic living play a role in the commitment to sustainable farming, right? And how can that be basically used in other industries? How can other industries adapt this way of working in a way that is mindful? I'm going to bring mindful because same way in the ocean you have to be mindful, same way in farming and agriculture there has to be mindfulness. How can we make sure that this way, the system of mindful and sustainable practices is adapted in every other aspect?
I love that so much. And it's I feel like my answer might not be the greatest answer, but it has to be intentionality. It's how we
Yeah,
lead with everything. When we realize that, yes, profits will, the bottom line will always matter, but we also don't have 7 planets. So the
sure.
intentionality to say, how do we as a brand choose to be different? How do
Yeah,
we as a brand separate ourselves, but also more than just separate ourselves, help our peers learn with us, right?
yeah,
How we're capturing the water, reusing it, how we are protecting our biodiversity, how we are, but it starts with intentionality. The brand has to
intentionality.
want to do it. It is
Yeah,
to realize that these oceans, if we don't take care of them, everything is at risk. The
yeah,
oxygen we breathe, the water that we look to for our taps, right?
yeah,
It all
yeah,
starts with the sea. And so the intentionality has to move from leadership, and
yeah,
in that leadership it has to come into the house, but then you hope to impact the communities with which you work. When you start
yeah,
to stand on the rooftop and you say, hey, we did something, and I think it's a good thing. And we should again be cheerleaders to brands that are trying, pushing, moving to
yes,
not only be sustainable but regenerative. And it's in our
yes.
coin that we're able to vote differently, I think.
I think I actually I love your answer. I saw a picture. There's a page on TikTok that actually shares the before and after of Johannesburg, and it goes to like I think your Yeovil and your Hillbrow and how the buildings used to look like 10 years ago less than and how they look now. And that for me was a wake-up call that we take for granted, like in fact libraries, in when I was in matric I studied at a library, and now we're losing libraries, and we're not realizing how easily we are losing things that are so meaningful and impactful in our communities. Rhinos, at some point we're going to say to our kids there was an animal called a rhino. And so like you're saying, even with the ocean, we don't want to get to a point where we're saying the ocean used to look like this and all we have is pictures instead of the natural experiences that we get to have. But what does conservation look like in your daily life, from the food that you
Mhm.
eat, that you decide to eat, the products that you use, and even the work that you do?
I love that question. So for me, it is, so there's an app called WWF Sassy.
Hmm,
So intentionality is asking, where does my fish come from? What
sure.
kind of fish is it? Is it in high abundance? Is it
Mm,
on the red list? Is it orange? And I think that's how you're able to select and choose in line with the ocean and the bounty that is in nature. So for me, that's where it starts. Where
yeah.
does your meat come from? Where do your apples come from? So I ask a lot of questions. So that's why actually I don't always eat out, because I've got too many questions than people have answers, and I
Yeah.
need to also understand that. But I
Yeah.
think for me, conservation says, how can I be more intentional? And
Yeah.
in my community, how do I bring everybody closer to the ocean, understanding that so many people might never see sharks, whales, dolphins, octopus, all of these beautiful marine life that you kind of get to see every other day. How do
Yeah.
you create a care? How do you build a love for a place that someone might never see with their own eyes? And so
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of my social media is about, bringing all of the beautiful parts of the sea closer to us and trying to
People.
tell
Yeah.
stories around it.
Yeah.
And access in the Black Mermaid Foundation, when the kids go out on these educational snorkel excursions, they come out and they see what's under there. They go
Mm,
back to their communities and they tell a different story about the
tell a
sea.
different story.
And so I
Yeah.
think it's all connected. It is the
Yeah.
stories that we hope to leave in the world, that
Yeah.
they might change something somewhere.
I mean, I was part of an initiative a few years ago about diversifying your plate, right? And we obviously speak on eat your veggies, eat this, but what we learned is that also in eating potatoes every day, the soil is not getting what it's the soil is getting damaged, and so it's not enough to just say eat your veggies, eat this, but we have to get to a point where we actually eat according to the seasons. That's the intentionality. It's like, what's in season now? What should I be eating now? Am I diversifying my plate, or am I eating the same thing every day? If I'm eating it every single day, how is it growing so fast?
That's spot on.
Yeah.
Locality as well, right? Where does it come from? You look at
Yeah.
avos. I used to be like, do you guys understand that it's not possible that you could eat avos all times, like through the
Oh,
year?
the whole
And
year.
everyone's like,
Yeah.
"But what does that mean?" You're like, but where does it come from? If it has to be like imported, what does that mean? I was in
Mm,
Mexico last year, and it was so interesting to hear about their sustainability work around bees, right? The honey that we all get to enjoy. It's like, but this honey comes from a Mayan bee, and this Mayan bee is no longer in such high abundance. And so
sure.
we cannot make honey all through the year. But if
Yeah.
you learn from nature, you realize that you cannot harvest in winter because the bees need it too.
Yeah.
How's
Yeah. Yeah.
that?
Yeah. And I said, because I've got apple trees and peach trees, and I don't have peaches the whole year. I only have peaches during, I think, from September. That's when they start, the flowering process happens. And then around October, November, December, that's when we have peaches. But throughout the rest of the year, there's no peaches. It's just the tree doing what it needs to do. And I think for me, that sparked something that if I'm eating a peach every day of the year, where does it come from? Because I can see from the tree in my garden that it's not always blooming peaches. And I think it that breaks it down on an everyday level. Like I said, it's important that we understand how does it affect me. So I think the most practical way is like, look at your own garden, look at the people who farm around you. Do they always have this, or it's seasonal, and we need to start looking at way life that way. But you spoke about taking a tour to the rainy farms in Paarl, and they obviously practice regenerative farming. In simple broken down terms, what is regenerative farming, and what does it look like for a me who has a backyard garden and a large scale farmer?
So interesting. I'm going to say my understanding. So it's not only using something once, it's the ability to be able to, I think, have multiple uses along the way, but it regenerates itself, right?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think
Okay.
that's my understanding. But what Rennie's did, which I absolutely loved, is there were two things that they did with the soil, going back to soil, is that one, they use alien plants. So alien plants are plants that are not native to South Africa, that would
Mm,
ordinarily take in more water than the native plants. So
Yeah.
they dig those out, but then they use those plants as fertilizer. So they mix it with the sand so that
Ah,
the sand remains rich, and it
yeah.
allows for that soil to be. So instead of
Fertilizer.
using fertilizer, they're able to use that soil. But more than that,
Sure.
they are able to reuse that same set of soil over 2 to 3 seasons. So they harvest and they plant again in the same sand, in the same
Yeah.
soil. And I
Yeah.
thought that was actually really special because even the way in which they do it, there's
Yeah.
an intentionality. The old plants, they don't just throw them away, they use them again to enrich the soil.
Yeah.
So it's really just beautiful to
The
see the
reuse.
intentionality again in
Yeah.
how they use their soil, in how they use the plants around them, in how they ensure the water is used right.
Yeah, the water's used right. Like you
Yeah.
said, I think, and as you're sharing, I'm just thinking of my mom. Every time I'm peeling potatoes and just or carrots, she just says, "No, don't throw away. Put it in the soil, and you create your own fertilizer." So that is regenerative farming. So it sounds like a big word that's reserved for the farms in Cape Town, and but it's like in your own backyard, you can create your own, and that's regenerative farming. And I think that's why these conversations are so important because, like I said, we can feel so excluded and feel like there's nothing you can do. But within your own space, these are almost systems and ways that you can really make use of. And I wanted to ask, how does your partnership with Farming to the Future tie into the bigger picture of ocean conservation?
For me, it was definitely the water aspect.
Yeah.
So how I felt the invitation into this conversation, it was through water. And the question says, how are we doing better with the amount of water that we do have? How are we
Mm.
looking to the future to make sure that future generations are able to enjoy the bounty that we get to enjoy today? And the
Yeah.
question starts by, what are you doing with your wastewater?
Mm.
How are you
Mm.
utilizing your water and your farming practices in a way that ensures minimum wastage?
Yeah.
Tell me what you learned from the drought. What did you implement after that in order to make sure that you could see a better and more hedged future when it
Yeah.
comes to the instability that comes with a changing climate, right?
Sure. Yeah.
We're clearly sitting and we're witnessing climate issues across the world. How are we prepared for it? Because
Yeah.
this is directly linked to food security. It's linked
Yeah.
to security on all measures. And and so I think that for me was the call, the pickup of the phone, the I'ma come see what y'all doing. It was the question around water.
Yeah, I love that. I want to touch on eating as we're about to close. I mean, we are diet frenzy generation. We have to eat right, and most of our eating protein diet, keto diet, all of that is based on weight loss and looking the aesthetic. But outside of that. I know now that eating well is not just about that. It's not just about aesthetics, but also the environment, like you said. Can you share for me what the ripple effect is of eating well?
Mm. The most natural thing that I think of is health is wealth, right?
Mm,
How we
mhm.
feed our bodies is how our bodies are able to perform for us. I think I often look at my body and my gratitude is beyond measure.
Yeah,
This body has done things I never thought it could, but it starts by ensuring that you're eating well, you're showing up for what your body needs at the time that it needs it. And again, in a culture that is so diet crazy, are we still listening to our bodies? And I
yeah,
think that kind of goes back to nature. Are we still listening to nature? Are we
yeah,
figuring out how we can live better and live in harmony with nature? My grandmother says, we've always been good guardians. We've always lived with nature so well, but now
mm.
she can't speak to us because we've also become monsters. And
Oof.
so, when I listen to my grandmother, there's something there.
Yeah,
There was a time when nature spoke and she was loud and we were good guardians. And now,
yeah,
like we started in this conversation, we are in a big consuming culture that
yeah,
doesn't give back to nature and it doesn't think about nature. And
sure.
so, in the same way that we feed our bodies, that same intentionality has to exist in our bodies around how are the trees doing? How are the oceans doing? How
Sure.
are our neighboring countries doing? How
Yeah,
are we, we have to be intentional.
yeah. There's
It's
bigger
unfortunate,
picture.
but it's true.
Yeah, I think there's bigger picture, and I think the time has come, and I'm so glad. I've been really engaging with a lot of women who are in sustainability, and every time I talk to them, it allows me to do a lot of almost cleaning in my own heart and in my own home. Like I started with checking out my wardrobe, and we got into a space at one in the influencer culture where you can't repeat an outfit, but outside of that, when you think of the ripple effect of that, it means you're buying clothes every day. Where do those clothes come from? Who is creating them? What is being thrown away? Where's the wastage of that? And then you sit with a closet where you're wearing an outfit once, and it sounds like such a simple thing, but this the space we're in of overconsumption has a ripple effect on every single thing that we do. And like you said, like your grandmother said, we used to listen to nature, and nature served us and we served nature, but now we're just trying to take and take and take and take from nature, and we're seeing the effects of that. We're seeing the storms, we're seeing all sorts of ways that nature's rebelling because we're not taking care of it. Sure, such an
You said it
interesting
perfectly.
question. I think there's a lot to learn, and I'm very curious, and I'm hopeful that we're going to engage more this year, and I'm hopeful that I'll have more of these conversations. And for me, it really is about learning, not coming from a place of an expert, but really learning and understanding and inviting other people to start making small changes. It's not to say go throw everything away and make dramatic changes, but it's like you said, asking the question, well, where does this come from? You don't have to
Yeah.
change everything at once, but where does it come from? Just that curiosity. And lastly, you wrote a book called Zandi's Song, and I just want to know, a children's book. What message were you trying to echo through your book?
Oh, thank you so much for this question. For me, it was number one, connecting us to the ocean. It may look over there, but there's so much beautiful life that lives beneath it. But I
Yeah.
wanted to sow the seed of conservation and the effect of
Mm,
plastic in our oceans. And
sure.
so to see how well Zandi's song has done is so powerful because it's not only putting in that seed of reading and being able to read and comprehend what you're reading, but it's also bringing in the first tenets of conservation.
Yeah.
How do we consume and where does it go? And so there's
Sure.
plastic in there, and then the beauty of the ocean. I absolutely love it.
I love that, and I think kids are the best place to start, because once kids are invested in something, the parents have no choice but to invest. And I'll tell you, so when my kids, the school that they went to, they were quite big on teaching on pollution and littering. And my daughter, ever since, if she goes to a place and there's litter, she will literally want to. She strikes a conversation on it every single time. Mommy, I don't understand why people litter. Why are people littering? Why are we dirtying the earth? In fact, there's a picture that they showed them, an illustration of how the earth looks. And she came home one day and she said, Mom, we have to go and clean up the earth. And I mean, it was like, okay, darling, baby, we'll go clean up the earth. But for me, I love that already kids have that
Yeah.
mindset that we have to take care of the space. So I think it's incredible that you did it. You created a children's book where the dialogue starts, and ultimately the parents will have to start getting involved as well. And my last few questions. Overcoming fear is obviously big in your journey, starting from just the diving, the 23 meters where you had to call yourself out. How has it changed you personally in your relationships and in everything that you do, your
Mhm.
relationship with fear?
Oh wow. It changed everything. I think there was a normalcy to run from, like
Yeah.
when something feels big or something feels scary, you run, you feel the fear and you run. And for me, it was kind of building a relationship with fear, like opening up that
Yeah.
door, that dark room, you put the lights on, everybody show yourself. All the
Uh-huh.
monsters come
Come
out,
on.
you know? And I think that changed everything for me because now when
Yeah.
I feel fear in any way, shape, or form, I
Yeah.
know that it's a calling to step into the circle, not to become small, but to step into it.
Mm.
And it's such a powerful indicator for me. When I'm afraid, I know that I'm onto something. And so it's the courage to step into the circle every single time.
Mm.
Open the door, turn the lights on, all the monsters come out. You're not the only one who's here. We're also excited. We're also driven. We also want to know what's going to happen. Fear,
Yeah.
you're not the only one who's here.
Oh man. Oh, You're such a beautiful voice for courage. Like I want to send my daughter to go on camp with you. I'm just like, go and hang out with Zandi. Like, I think you're such a beautiful voice for Black girls, for Black women, and just changing the narrative. And outside of everything you're doing, I think at the heart of you is an invitation for people to really come to know who they are, come to know what they're capable of, come to break their own barriers. And really, when the more I speak to you, the more I'm just like, my limitations, even in this moment, are being questioned. I'm switching on the light to saying, okay, come on, monsters, let's have a talk, let's have a sit down. But just in closing, what do you hope to achieve with Woolworths, with this initiative, and what message do you want to leave to everybody who's listening and saying, Zandi, I hear you, but maybe you are an outlier, you know?
Wow. First, I hope with Woolies, I hope to inspire. I
Yeah.
think there's something in realizing that, like you said earlier, we can always take something little back into our world and make that be the change.
Mm.
And one person can change everything. Like we multiply ourselves in all the moments that we learn something and we tell our families, whether it's about plastic, whether it's about saving water. I just hope that from this, it's inspired action to do
Sure.
something differently, to see how you
Mm.
can save water in your community, you know? Um, and I think maybe from my end, I always think that I grew up in Soweto. I
Yeah.
grew up in Soweto, and
Yeah.
now I live as a mermaid to the world. There's something so crazy about it, but it reminds me that no matter how old we are, no matter where we come from, we are capable of it all. If we can dream
Yeah.
it, we can be it. If you're seeing it, it is yours. And ultimately, of everything, when you feel the fear, step into the circle. It's like that moment in Frozen. Okay, so this is my closing. In Frozen, when she steps and it becomes ice, and she steps again and it becomes ice, and eventually the whole space is ice, that is fear. When you step into it, your world expands in ways that you could never have imagined. And that's a powerful place to be.
Thank you so much, Zandi. And the work that you're doing is absolutely incredible. I'm inspired. I'm about to go sit, switch on the light, and invite fear and invite all those monsters and really just take stock. But most importantly, to just be mindful and present. And I think I'll always go back to that scenario you shared, that as soon as you go in, as you dive in, you cannot think about how you dived in, dove, whatever, dived in. And you also cannot look to the bottom and you cannot look to the top. You have to be present. Thank you so much for today. You are absolutely incredible, and I wish you the best in everything that you do.
Thank you so very much for having me, Mpoomy. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for the conversation and the heart in the midst of
Yeah.
it all. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Wisdom and Wellness family. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And today I want to ask you, what can you do in your own capacity to make a difference, not only in the environment, but in the community and in your own